Now, just because you've transed and you want to call yourself a woman, and you've had your,
Yes.
you may or may not have had your penis cut off, or you are a woman that now thinks you're a man, whether you've got a penis or not because it's been sewn in. You've kept your womb because you want your cake and eat it. I'm sorry, that does not make you a pregnant man. You are still a pregnant woman.
Good evening and welcome to NBGA News. We're privileged to be here with Janice Atkinson, a member of the European Parliament. And we're here today in the European Parliament building on Smith Street in London. So we're here in the heart of the beast, the Kalergi Palace, I would like to call it, because they have outside flying that evil, racist, fascist flag, the blue background with the yellow stars. And I'm going to ask you later a bit more about all of that. And I thought I should interview Janice because I was previously running the London University's Brexit Society, and she came along with one of her friends to our store and was helping hand out leaflets to the students at LSE. And I uploaded a photo of her with our group, and there was absolute hysteria amongst all these fans of Boris Johnson who said that apparently she's a racist because she's part of the same European Parliament group as Front National run by Le Pen. I think that's absolutely absurd, so I just want to ask you, Janice, is it morally irreprehensible to be associated with Marine Le Pen?
Well, what really irritates me in all of this is that the right is fractured.
Yes.
One of the things that I spoke about over the years, and I know that people like Dan Hannan have spoken about this, it's about uniting the right. I wrote a book about Brexit, life after Brexit, before we had the referendum. And one of my greatest woes is that the right is completely, utterly fractured. And that's why the Conservative Party doesn't win a majority. That's without boundary changes. And so I sit with Marine, I sit with the populists, which is a swear word that the opposition give to us because they can't call us racists and xenophobes, etc. Look, I joined the Tory party when I was about 16. I stood for them in Batley and Spen, a target seat. I was told it was one of the best campaigns that had ever been run, but we had the Blair bounce. The Clegg bounce. I haven't changed my views in that time. I'd like anybody to point out to me anything that I've said that's racist or xenophobic. I've been called into Conservative Central Office because of talking about leaving the European Union. I wasn't allowed to talk about those things. I wasn't allowed to talk about migration. And that's the reason I left the Tory party. Now, those of us who are on the so-called right are actually winning across Europe. Now, Marine Le Pen got 11 million votes in her presidential campaign. She got 35% of the vote. Are 11 million people in France racist? I would argue not. It's a very easy term, I think, to throw against people when they're the enemies. What the right needs to do is listen to people like me and listen to people like Dan Hannan and unite, because the left have done it. Momentum have taken over the Labour Party, and when you look at the European Union, from Merkel's party onwards to the alt-left, as I call them, where Sinn Féin sit, the IRA, and the Nordic Greens. They're all completely bonkers, but it's a socialist agenda that they're driving through. And all the time that you've got the opposition fighting amongst themselves, calling us all racist and fascists. Now, take the Austrian elections this weekend.
Excellent
My
result,
friends,
yes.
the FPO, the so-called populists, they're going to be, hopefully, in coalition. You look at the Lega Nord, the people that I'm in the same group with. Matteo Salvini, their leader, is probably likely to be the kingmaker in Italy's election next year. And so it goes on. Geert Wilders, again, another man sort of vilified because of his views. But again, he was the number 2 party and was the official opposition in Holland. So when you start joining up the dots and you look at what's happening in Denmark and Sweden with the Swedish Democrats and the Finns, I think we're pretty popular rather than being racist, because it's not racist to want to control your borders.
So do you think we should embrace and be proud of this word?
Oh, populism? Oh, absolutely, yeah, because when I first arrived in the European Parliament, when we started arguing with our opposition, like Guy Verhofstadt, the Brexit negotiation, I mean, he's like public enemy number one. And Mr. Weber, who heads up, who's Merkel's man in the European People's Party, they started using the terms racist and xenophobes. And UKIP used to get very uptight about it. I said, no, just laugh at them because we're winning. Just laugh. And of course, then we won Brexit. A lot of their voters were saying to them, well, actually, we believe in what Farage is saying. We believe in what Janice is saying. We believe in what Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini, etc. So why are you calling us racists and xenophobes? So they recalibrated their terminology. So they call us populists now. But if you look up the Oxford English Dictionary view of populist, it means representing the people. And I'm proud of that.
Isn't that what you're meant to do?
And that's what I do. I represent all the people that voted for Brexit, that sent me to the Parliament to be the opposition. I'm proud of that.
So they're criticising basically politicians who represent the will of the people, which is what politicians are meant to do. That's their job, to represent us. That's why we elect them. So I find it absolutely ridiculous. What I wanted to ask you about is these people that lie that you're racist and so forth, these Boris Johnson fanboys have all gone very quiet. You know, they're very happy to come out and preach for Brexit only after Boris did. They're very quiet before then, very scared of the word racist. And since he's gone quiet, they've all gone quiet. So what's going on here? Why is there this sudden silence by the likes of Boris Johnson on Brexit? I don't see them being very vocal. Vote leaves seem to disappear and everyone seemed to just give up the day the referendum happened.
Yeah, it has. And again, we shouldn't be giving up because the enemy is in number 10 Downing Street. I do not believe that Mrs May actually wants Brexit. David Davis, I know him. I ran his Against 42 Days detention campaign. I believe he wants Brexit. But as he once said to me, actually, I don't know what Theresa May stands for. And we don't know what she stands for the likes of Vote Leave and others to be fragmented. And again, there's many sort of campaigns going on, certain people funding others, people won't stand on a platform with other people. You know, we've got to unite to make sure this actually happens. Boris Johnson, does he actually believe in Brexit? I don't know. I mean, if his followers, his fanboys think that I'm a racist, well, why was Boris Johnson happy to walk up and down high streets in South East London when we got him elected the first time round? They were with me.
I think he does anything to get a vote, to be honest.
Of course he does, but he can reach the parts that people can't reach. Now, I think that Boris, it's his last attempt, isn't it, to become leader? Absolutely. Because if he doesn't do it this time. I did actually say to Manfred Weber in Parliament 2 weeks ago when I gave my speech, and he said, look, we don't know who to call in London on Brexit, and I suggested to him, you put Boris Johnson on speed dial and Jacob Rees-Mogg on speed dial. I think Boris probably has lost his time. I mean, if he teams up with Gove and they become friends again, which I think is very hard to do, then possibly, because I think they see Jacob coming through from the right flank. Boris, does he believe in Brexit? Don't know. I really don't know.
No, he seems to be a bit of a flip-flop, sort of not populist in the sense we are. He's a bit of a demagogue. I think he does says anything to get a vote. You mentioned Jacob there. Do you think the Conservatives would ever give Jacob a chance, or are they opposed to right-wing values now? Are they opposed to social conservatism?
Well, if they give, I think their constitution tells them that they still have to actually go out to the membership, and the membership traditionally is a bit more right-wing than the people that Cameron got in the last wave, and also in 2010, and then again in 2015, the type of people that he got onto the list to get into Parliament. It certainly wasn't women like me. They were more social democrat types, and they're very loud, the likes of Anna Soubry, Heidi Alexander, etc. You know, they're not representing the real grassroots. So I think Jacob's got every chance of winning.
I think that word made me feel a bit ill there, the mention of Anna Soubry, but maybe that brings us on to the next topic of something Anna Soubry feels very passionate about, it seems, political correctness. And you're very straight talking. We've just discussed, which is why I wanted to speak to you, one of the main reasons. We've just discussed Theresa May used to be the Home Secretary, used to be in charge of immigration. And you're part of the European Parliament. Now, one of the major European crises at the moment is the so-called refugee crisis. Now, I almost gave my opinion away there, which I shouldn't do. But I want to know, do you think these people are refugees?
You know, I have been over to Calais. I have spoken to the so-called refugees. I've argued with the charities as well. I've argued with the BBC. We sat in Calais the day the little boy, Ian Kurdi, was actually washed up on the beach. You remember that?
Yes.
It was the start of the so-called refugee crisis. It's a very, very difficult time. But what we're up against is what I call the human rights industry, who I take on time and time again. And when I was last in, no, actually the time before I was last in Calais, the BBC put me up against people like the Red Cross. And I challenged them live on air and said, look, you tell people to lose their passports along the way. These people, if they're real, genuine asylum seekers and refugees, and you actually have to strip that out. There's economic migrants, there's refugees, and there's asylum seekers. And the tragedy in all of this, because the Red Cross and the other people in the human rights industry tell them to lose their paperwork, so therefore they don't claim asylum at the first port of call. If you are a genuine asylum seeker, you will claim asylum where you are.
Yes.
Now, so what's the EU doing about it? Well, we bribed Turkey. We gave them €6 billion to house these people. I was with somebody from the AK party, from Erdogan's party last week, who came to see me and said, oh, would you please support us to join the EU? And I laughed and I said, you want me? Did you Google me before you come here? I said, I will never sanction any country to join this sclerotic union where you just give away your laws. I said, but can we talk about where our €6 billion have gone, because we contributed to that. I said they've just handed over this cash. I said we've had these people held in appalling conditions in holding camps doing the EU's dirty work. And as we started chatting, we said actually because Syria, Raqqa is almost released, people are starting to go home. Now, if you take in a so-called refugee and a Syrian, as we've been urged to do, they don't go home. That's fact. What could I tell? I mean, this is such a large subject.
Well, yes, we could talk for hours on this, and it's something I feel passionate about, and I know the people that watch this channel get very animated about this subject, because we are a crowded island. We have a lot of unemployed people, and now we're being told to take these people in. Now, those people in Calais, are they really, by UN definition, actually a refugee? Because you just mentioned the first port of call, so they don't meet that definition. And you said you've been there, and it's a bit of a shame. You mentioned other politicians being there. It'd be nice if maybe someone in the cabinet would go there and have a look and actually see what's going on, but obviously that's not going to happen. But tell us about the people there. How many children were there?
There are very few children. The majority were very young, able economic migrant men, and they were admitting to me they were economic migrant men. The women that I saw were very heavily made up, and this was the same in the camps in Greece as well. They had their nails painted, they had beautiful features, they had makeup on, etc.
Well, these people are starving to death, though.
It's interesting because the camp, before it was razed to the ground, they had banks and banks and banks of toilets, washing facilities, cooking was going on. Perversely, I wasn't allowed into the camp. And I had to show my passport. I had to prove to the police who I was. I was in a Belgian car with my Dutch assistant, who was a British MEP. Once they realised who I was, they let me in. But I wasn't allowed beyond the barriers. It was very, very well run. There were schools in there. The food was being cooked. It was pretty well run. So I spoke to them from Eritrea. I spoke to some women from Eritrea and Sudan. Why do you want to come to my country? Well, because we've got a better life there. I said, how have you actually physically got here? And they admitted they were people trafficked. I mean, some of these girls, the ones I'm talking about, were very, very, their English was fantastic. They admitted they'd been people trafficked across from the various countries. They paid £6,000 or £7,000. They were middle class.
As you mentioned, that English was good.
Yeah,
so they obviously
very,
probably
very
been to
English.
University, hadn't they?
Yeah, very well educated. There was a bit of a sort of hierarchy in there. The Albanians were running the camp down the road in Dunkirk, and that's where the drug running was going on, the people trafficking. This has been uncovered by BBC Radio Kent. We worked together on this. So there was sort of quite a lot of rackets going on in there. When the camp was razed to the ground, these people went off to Paris. Rather than actually arresting them, often, some of them had actually been offered asylum to stay in France because it was all too much. It was all too difficult for Francois Hollande. They are actually the majority before March, 18 months ago, were offered asylum, or basically you can stay in France, and 80% of them turned it down. So they razed the camp to the ground. They all moved to Paris, and that's seen, the underpasses that have grown up is just like sort of a jungle there. If you go to the Gare du Nord at the moment, it's like little Mogadishu that you're running through. It's very, very unsafe in the undergrounds, etc. But night after night after night, they're trying to break in. So I spoke to a charity there, and she said, "Do you want to see some of the teenagers?" I said, "I'd love to see some of the teenagers." Oh, hold on a second, it's 1 o'clock. I said, "Well, are they having lunch?" "No, they'll just be getting up now for their breakfast." I said, "Why are they getting up?" I said, "Oh, it's just like students." And I said that, and she said, no, they've been all night trying to break in via the Channel Tunnel, via the ferries, etc. Now, the first time I went was about 4 years ago, and I went by the ferry, and it was at the time where all the migrants were trying to break into the lorries. And as we were coming back, we saw the dogs, sniffer dogs, and they were British personnel, private security companies that were up and down outside the lorry. Now, it was midday when we were going back, and I went over and spoke to one, and he said, "Oh, the little dog that was there, which was a spaniel, had caught 22 migrants that morning." I said, "Wow." He said, "Oh, that's nothing." He said, "Her sister got 14. I said, "Okay, fine, where are they?"
Patted that dog on the head.
Brilliant for the dog. But there was a sort of disincentive for the dog if the dog understood. I said, "What do you do with them?" "Well, we just pop them back over the fence." And I said, "What happens?" He said, "They'll be back in a few hours' time." So he said, "All the time, we're just trying to clear the lorry park and we're popping them over the wall again."
This is ridiculous. We have we have unemployment across the north of England, the Midlands, and instead we're bringing more people in, people that don't have any useful skills probably to give to us. We already have plenty of unskilled migrants thanks to the EU open borders. And it just seems to be a constant pressure by the EU for us just to take in more and more migrants, even illegal. People have no basis to come here. You pointed out that they speak English very well. They're past safe countries on the way here, so they don't meet the UN definition. So not one of these people should come in. They've got safe refuge there in France, which they should turn down. They're just literally coming here to sponge off our welfare state because they know we're the most generous. But what I'm wondering is, why is the EU doing this? What do you think? You can say anything you want.
Why are they doing it? I think they genuinely believe that they're actually helping people.
That's stupid.
Of course it is, because we say, look, what you're trying to do is just, you're undermining our culture and our identity.
Yes.
Merkel took in 1 million. We've got 1 million illegal immigrants here. Now, we've known this for ages. So, Amber Rudd popping up the other day saying, "Oh, yes, there's 1 million." We've known it's 1 million. That's the ones that we think we know about. Angela Merkel let another 1 million in. We've got another 1 million sitting in Libya at the moment, trying to break in to our countries. They're coming through the Balkans. People trafficking, 6,000 or 7,000 pounds a time to get up there. Because once they get the kids in, then they can bring in their parents as well. I mean, I was criticised on the BBC by calling these so-called child migrants that we took in a year ago as man boys, and I was the interviewer on the BBC said, "Where do you get your statistics from? The Daily Mail?" And I said, "No, actually, it's the Office for National Statistics, and it has now I've been proven right that 50% of those so-called children that we took in, those so-called Syrian refugees from Calais last year, 50% of them were over the age of 25. So what we say in the European Parliament is that what's happened in Sweden, the rapes have gone up, the crime has gone up, the crime has gone through the roof in Sweden, but there was nothing happening in Sweden, when President Trump actually raised this. Malmo is the rape capital of Europe now. In Merkel's, I do remember 18 months ago on New Year's Eve, there was a complete and utter blanket ban on the reporting of the sexual harassment, the rapes and the assaults that had been carried out in Cologne and Malmo, etc. And it was down to people like you on the platform that we're on now on social media, where the police actually, they were saying, "We can't go out with this information. We can't actually let this go out. So I think it was the police chief of Cologne said everything was fine last night. There wasn't a single incident. And then the women started coming forward. So what we're doing, we're opening our borders. Same as we've done in this country, where we've got Pakistani migrant men of second, third generation have been raping our children, drugging them, using them as prostitution. Very vulnerable young girls, and that's happening all across Europe now. That's what we've opened our doors to. And there's another UN report that came out that said if we're not careful over the next few years, we start letting these people in, we're going to get 10 million that's going to come through Africa and the Middle East. Is that what we want? It's undermining a whole way of life. I don't understand why the European Union wants to do this, why Merkel wants to do this, why the alt-left and the socialist group, the liberal group, what do they not love our countries? Actually, what they hate is the nation state.
There you go.
And if they flood our continent with migrants, like the Labour courted the migrants of the 50s and 60s, and they're all very welcome, you know, the people that we took in from Bangladesh and North Africa and from the Caribbean, they've all contributed mainly to our society. Those that live in the enclaves of the north of England and the East End of London, from Pakistani heritage, we've got a problem with them. So what do we do about it? I think there's very little we can do all the time that we're linked to the European Union, because we're being told you have to have so many migrant numbers. Now, we're outside of Schengen. We're not contributing to that. But morally, I think Mrs May, the likes of Cameron, Amber Rudd, I think morally we should be taking our fair share as well. And that's the problem that we've got.
I'm going to come in a second onto another area of political correctness, but just to wrap this up, I just want to ask you, do you think, talking political correctness, cultural Marxism or the Frankfurt School is somehow behind what I would describe as an Anglophobic attack on our heritage? They seem to be determined to destroy the British nation state, as you said. Do you think it's because we haven't embraced the collectivism because we're such individualistic people?
I think you're right. It's, this whole sort of multiculturalist, as you say, cultural Marxism, where it goes from transgender to the whole gender agenda. We're trying to protect our Judeo-Christian heritage, which they seem to hate. And I must say, in this interview, I have no faith. So I'm not defending it from a right-wing Christian point of view. I'm not, but we're being constantly undermined with gay marriage, which actually I don't really mind if people want to marry. But what I do object to is when it's the free speech. So if a vicar or an imam or a rabbi stands up on a Friday, Saturday or Sunday morning and says, I'm against gay marriage, that's actually hate crime. That's hate speech now, brought in by Blair. And again, it's all part of this sort of cultural Marxism and undermining our society. Now, the EU absolutely hates the nation state. They want to move towards federalism. You know, a few weeks ago, Juncker spoke about basically United States of Europe, a federalism. The cat was out of the bag. And so therefore, if they get rid of the nation states, if they flood our continent with migrants that have no identity to Europe, then they become voters, they will be adherent to the EU, they say that's the way forward, these are the people that let them in, and therefore you diminish the nation state. But the nation state is fighting back. So that's what we have to do. It's really important. And I think eventually the EU will actually fail. But what we need also is for the people to vote people like Mrs May out of Parliament and Amber Rudd.
Yeah,
you know, these people, the Subarys of this world, are behind all of this. They believe like in this culture. Well, under the present system, that's not going to happen a fast pace.
Well, our system has a few issues where it seems you have to climb up one of these two rotten parties infested cultural Marxism. Now that flag outside I mentioned earlier was designed by Kalogi, called Jehovah Kalogi. He also chose the Ode to Joy piece of music by Beethoven, which is the anthem. He chose all of that. Yeah. And the other thing he said is that he wanted to combine the people of North Africa and Europe as a new master race. He actually said that, and that's probably pretty racist, surely. But that was the position he put forward. So I just want to quickly ask you, what is the Barcelona Declaration? For anyone that's not heard of it.
Look, anything that is sort of out, we're Brexiting, Okay,
Yes.
so it's rather irrelevant what the Barcelona Declaration is, what Kalergi is, what that flag is. It's irrelevant because we're leaving.
Yes,
we
it is in that
triggered
sense,
we
yes.
triggered Article 50. We don't have to worry about this, but what we do have to worry about is our friends and helping them to release their nations as well.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, I'll move on. I won't ask you nasty questions. I'll move on to what I want to also ask you about on this matter, political correctness, is you've written a book and you've mentioned all these politically correct politicians. Another one we could possibly mention is Justine Greening, who doesn't seem to believe in gender anymore. And now we have the government has also told the civil service they're no longer to call people he or she because it's offensive, which, I've seen this nonsense at student union events at universities. I've been told off on university campuses for using the word he and she, and also for waving a British flag. But to see this is happening in the civil service is actually kind of scary, that our country is getting to such a stage. The government's now starting to have this nonsense in student unions. But what is your book? Tell us a little bit about your book.
Okay, it's called The Gender Agenda. And I've got a US publishing contract, and it will probably come out next spring. So I actually tell them what women want and what we don't want. And then I detail the whole sort of at the moment there's an awful lot in the media about transitioning children from the age of 3 up to 8, where they are sent through to this clinic. I think the people that are performing the operations on people under 18 and over 18, I think they're Frankenstein monsters, actually. There's a tiny. I do believe in gender dysphoria. Actually, it is a condition. A friend of mine trans 20 years ago from a man to a woman, and she's in my book as well. There's a whole insidious agenda going on here, driven by the likes of Justine Greening. The next census will actually have a slot in there to say what you are, whether you're binary, non-binary, cis, jizz, or whatever, the cultural Marxism word for this is. And
okay, I'm supposed to be serious.
But and what's going on in our primary schools at the moment, where children are being allowed to self-identify, and then they're being sent to these clinics, and it's doing untold damage. Now, a lot of these kids, again, scientifically, it's been proven that if little Johnny starts dressing up in dresses, that actually he's not necessarily trans. He just wants to play, or actually he could be gay. He could turn out to be gay along the way, and you are impeding that boy's development. There's more boys that do it than actual girls. I object to gender neutral bathrooms. When I go to the loo, I don't want some bloke standing there washing his hair. If I'm hitching up my stockings, or I'm doing my hair, or I'm shifting my bra around or whatever, which we do, I don't want a bloke standing there doing that. And if you are a girl that's in puberty and you've started your period, you don't want to go to the Tampax machine and get a Tampax out, or something else to stop your blood flow in front of men. I mean, I know I'm being sort of quite open and
feel free. This is not
graphic.
The BBC, but
this is this is not what girls want.
No.
And all this nonsense obviously comes out of the EU as well. Why we're embracing that, I really don't know. Why am I, as a woman, every time I go through airport security or through Eurostar, I go through Eurostar once a week from Kent. They all know me. Hi, Janice, how are you? Every day I go off, twice a week I go off, and there I've got a woman feeling around my bra. Oh, is that your bra? Have you got an underwide bra on? It's bloody obvious I've got an underwide bra on, but I don't want to be felt up in front of the other men, the security guys, etc. And then my waistband is pinged, so my knickers are pinged. My shoes are. I'm not a jihadi bride. My shoes shouldn't have to come off, so I go through in my stocking feet. And then I have the indignity of my bag being searched for drugs or explosives. I do not fit the profile, and nor do the majority of the women in this country fit the profile of a jihadi bride. Stop it. It's dangerous, for a start. So I take on that angle as well in the book. We object to so much of this cultural Marxism that is being forced upon us. I'm not going to say too much about the book because obviously it's going to come out next spring, and I'm going to go on a book tour, and it's quite controversial. But it's actually speaking up for real women. The whole gender debate is had by very, very few elite women at the top in the creative arts, like the BBC, the whole gender pay rubbish row, and the few people that work in the top of advertising. But this is sort of crept in because the likes of the BBC and the mainstream media are giving these people a voice. They don't speak for us. They don't speak for the ordinary women that work in Walmart or Tesco's, the people that earn the minimum wage or whatever. This is very much groupthink by a very, very small elite group of women that have now imposed their views on our corporate boardrooms. They've imposed their views in our universities, so you can't have free speech. We've got snowflakes wanting safe spaces. I was invited to speak at Cambridge University a couple of times. I actually turned it down because it didn't suit my agenda. Now, I think if I'd been invited,
there might be a few explosions.
Yeah, well, I'd probably be uninvited, actually, because of my views. It's interesting that one of the Johnson brothers, Joe Johnson, has taken on the universities this week and said, look, we have to have free speech. We have to have, we can't have these so-called sort of snowflake safe spaces, because that's not what debate is about in this country. And you've had this tiny, tiny female elite driving this, talking about mansplaining, man aggression, all these words, and it's demeaning my husband, my sons. I have sons, and we've got to fight back to say there are more women going to university than men, and they are reading biology, and they're not doing some of the STEM subjects like mathematics or engineering, but they are going into medicine. There's more women studying medicine. There's more women studying law. We're coming out the other end, and we're actually earning more than the men. Yes, we do go off and have babies. That's a biological fact. Fun fact for you here. Denmark has asked the UN to take the words out pregnant mums or pregnant women out of the UN charters. And
what's it going to be replaced with?
Because men can have babies too. Now, just because you've transed and you want to call yourself a woman, and you've had your you may or may not have had your penis cut off, or you are a woman that now thinks you're a man, whether you've got a penis or not because it's been sewn on. You've kept your womb because you want your cake and eat it. I'm sorry, that does not make you a pregnant man. You are still a pregnant woman.
Well, it depends, I guess, how we're going to define men and women, but I surely DNA and chromosomes have some relevance.
Look, even if you're gay, you're still a man. If you're a lesbian, you're still a woman. If you have your penis chopped off, you're still a man.
You're a man who chopped your penis off. It doesn't change. That doesn't necessarily make a difference.
Tiny number of people that are actually gender dysphoria. But this whole agenda has just been foisted on us because it's come out of the EU. The whole gender stuff is. Guess who's behind it? George Soros. He's produced a definitive report with all the NGOs that contributed to the 2013 report in the European Parliament. And all this is being pushed through from there and embraced by the likes of Justine Greening. I don't care she's a lesbian.
No, I don't care
I
either.
have no interest. She's a woman. I have no interest. But don't impose what you think is normal, which is actually abnormal on the majority. And there's going to be a big lash against this, not least from parents at schools, where they're really messing with the minds and actually the bodies of our children.
Yeah, there was a news report, I think, this week about, I think it was Obama's children, or Hillary, or was it one of the American politicians on the left? There's some children at a nursery or something, and there was this woman dressed as a demon. It was actually a man, or whatever you want to say, who had trans to being a woman. And, this sounds seems to be an acceptable thing to be presenting to little children. It's from the very youngest age. They're desperate to try and remove from those children's thinking any concept of gender. And I think this comes back to the cultural Marxism of trying to smash up our institutions, including the family, and just make us all agents subject to the welfare state, to the government, and we're just going to have this big encompassing European government, and it is breaking down the structure. We all just end up viewing the government almost as our parents, and it makes me think very much of 1984.
Oh, it's often quoted, it's very Orwellian, this sort of groupthink. It's frightening. But there is a sort of backlash that is going on quietly because Brexit started it, and then we had President Trump, who actually I was in New York on election night. I was in Trump Tower at a little party, underneath, and that's quietly sort of happening. So the people are revolting, literally. We're not going to be.
Well, they think we're revolting, don't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But I love it.
Just to wrap up, I thought I'd ask you. We've spoken a lot about the Conservative Party sort of lost its way. It's had too much infiltration by basically Marxists, and whether they're cultural Marxists, the likes of Justin Greening, the wonderful people like Morgan. No disrespect to him, of course, but what do you think we can do to challenge what's happening to ensure that Theresa May gets and gives us Brexit rather than whatever this current theatrical display is?
Well, the only thing that can happen is that her Brexit MPs challenge her, as Ian Patterson and the Leave Means Leave people did today, by saying, actually, we've got to go to World Trade Organisation rules. You're going over to Brussels today, you just tell them how it is, because they're just playing with us. We don't have to produce the checkbook to pay a Brexit bill. In fact, actually, they owe us 9 billion because of all the assets, etc., and because we've been a net contributor for the past 30 years. So, therefore, it's up to her ministers and her backbenchers to hold her feet to the fire. And actually, the Tory party as well, the grassroots, you've got to rise up and challenge what's going on at the top of the party. She's only prime minister by default, because Gove stabbed Boris in the back. They had the argument. Andrea Leadsom had a snowflake moment and couldn't stand it up. So, she comes through the middle. But, you've got people like David Davis in the background, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris, maybe not. You've got Gove coming through. I really like Liam Fox. People start looking at him. Serious guy, setting up all these trade deals. This is the man that's been going around the world and has got 40 potential free trade deals lined up. I would say to the Tory party, give our Prime Minister your leader until Christmas, and if she hasn't delivered what we want, and we don't have a deal on the table by Christmas, then she's got to go. You've got to get rid of her.
Absolutely, I agree with you. In fact, I wouldn't mind if she left now, but.
No, I wouldn't either, because she's not up to the job. I mean, we've seen behind the scenes briefing against her, when she found it very, very difficult. I mean, the arrogance of that woman going to the country. I was driving down the road, I was in my car, I was bashing the steering wheel going, oh God, Brexit.
Oh, should have filmed this.
I was just so furious. I was so furious. And I thought, I don't know, she could win this, until she suddenly turned and then was threatening to raid the bank accounts of pensioners and reneging. That wasn't real Tory stuff. That was Cameron coming through again. It was this whole total sort of Blair, Cameron, and she was carrying on the mantle. And that's what the Tory party have got to remember. And she had the Brexiteers, she had the Labour, the socialist Brexiteers on her side. They were going to hold their nose, as they were actually for me up in Batley and Spent. Oh, we like the cut of your jib, lass. I'm a coal miner and I've never voted Tory before, but I like you. I like you saying you're plain talking. And all of a sudden she changed it. She was taking money out of their bank accounts, money that had already been taxed God knows how many times. And that changed. That was a big, big game changer. And she could have let, and this is what the Tory party have to remember, she could have let a real Marxist in to number 10.
She almost did.
And it's really, really frightening. So I wouldn't trust May. So like you, I'd like her gone tomorrow. She isn't up to the job. She isn't capable. Let's put her out of her misery and get somebody in that's a real Brexiteer.
And hopefully eventually a real populist. Anyway, I'd like to thank you very much, Janice. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to this channel, click the big red button, and if you're feeling very generous, you can donate to Patreon and help me get some better microphones and things. So have a good evening. Thank you.
Make Britain great again by watching Make Britain Great Again TV.
Absolutely. And if you haven't, go and find Janice on Twitter and follow her now, please do.
Janice for Brexit.
Absolutely, yes.